you read the Bible. It's so ambiguous at best. The only thing you could get, I think, is Leviticus 18 and 20. Those verses, the best you can get. And even with the Pauline corpus within the Book of Romans and 1 Corinthians, the best you can get is a prohibition on penetrative anal sex. That's the best you could get. Does that mean oral, anal, kink, BDSM are okay? So it doesn't have anything to do with being gay, homosexuality, trans, whatnot. It's about this male patriarchy. And anything that deviates from that is a problem.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Apostate Mind. I'm Mark Peralta, and today I've got another interview. I've got a very special person that I'm so thrilled to have and introduce to you. His name is Jason, who is an up-and-coming podcaster who really enjoys and is very passionate about fighting Christian hate against the LGBTQ plus community. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and bring him in. Jason, welcome to Apostate Mind. How are you?
I'm good. It was quite an introduction. I mean, I guess at some point we might get the elephant in the room that I identify as a Christian and how that doesn't really matter.
Tell us, please, Jason, who are you? What do you do? And I've already mentioned some things, but tell us more about you.
So I am 41 years old, but I spent my early 20s having an arrested development after being rejected from half of my family for being gay. Like most people who have an extended adolescence in the 20s, I hit the club scene. I experimented, I sowed my oats, but I started this adulting, living the normal 9-to-5 life later in life. So I was in my early 30s when I started school, per se. Got my bachelor's degree in human services, and then I entered the child welfare arena for some reason. Everyone told me not to do it in child protective services, and then I had to do it. So I've been working in the field for about 4 years before I got a scholarship and a fellowship to get my master's in social work. The government here in Pennsylvania paid my salary, and I was a full-time graduate student at the University of Pittsburgh in the School of Social Work. And I spent that time finding a way to really hone my skills as an activist and helping people heal from religious trauma.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Could you maybe tell us back about your personal journey and experiences as a member of the LGBTQ plus community and how religion has affected you?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a teen in the late 90s, early 2000s, it just wasn't cool to be gay. I'm not saying it's cool now, but like it just wasn't possible to be out. And I really struggled in that time period with my sexuality, obviously. And when I started to really realize that I was gay, I turned to religion. And of course, I was put into reparative therapies, and it really messed with me. And I am lucky, though, that even though half of my family wasn't accepting, another half of my family was. And I'm not going to necessarily further air my family's dirty laundry, but for those who are watching and know me, they'll know exactly who I'm talking about. But I was very fortunate that I had grandparents who were in Greek Orthodox, if I may.
I was going to ask you what tradition.
And the funny thing is the side of my family that is, I think they would fall into like the Baptist evangelical, but they don't even go to church. Like that was the funny thing. I always felt like you couldn't even tell me quote scripture to save your life, but you're disowning me. But whatever. But my grandparents on the side that was affirming were Greek or Catholics, and later we found out because of the Catholic abuse scandal, they didn't want us to know. That's why they left the Catholic Church in the early 2000s. So they went to the Greek Orthodox tradition. And, I had grandparents who said, look, gay or straight, there's acceptable behaviors. You have to, if you're going to have sex, whether you're straight or gay, be safe, get tested. And I think that protective factor was there for me, thankfully, which was a very much protective factor. I think my life would have went a lot worse. And especially had when I went to the conversion therapies in the early 2000s, the way it starts is this. They try to make you believe, and this is how it still is, because I work with people who escape conversion therapies. And sadly, in Pennsylvania, I don't know about other states, especially in Texas, I know they're legal, but in Pennsylvania, they're legal behind clergy settings. You just can't work within the boundaries of your, like if you're, I'm working from the National Association of Social Workers, I'm working towards licensed clinical social worker credential. So I can't practice that credential and say, like, you can change your sexual orientation. But within clergy settings, they're perfectly legal. And they tell you, you start off, they're like, you can change. It's possible. Anything's possible with God. So you buy into that. You drink the Kool-Aid, or you go jug it by the gallon, if I may. And you get this like short-term, it's working. And then after a while, you start like, I don't know, I'm still watching like Baywatch and getting turned on by the guy. Like, what the hell? Like, and then it changes. And this is what I wrote in the manuscript, and this is what I still find happens, is they, you can carry your cross like Jesus did. You can carry this affliction of this is actually a gift from God, because he wants to see if you'll carry your cross like Jesus did. So basically, you'll live your life and just not act on your sexual orientation, on your inborn sexual urges. Let me tell you, that does really, it never ends well. Let me just say that. For myself, it didn't end well. It set me back a lot. It threw me into the despairs of depression. I turned to substances for a long time. I've thankfully been able to change my relationship to alcohol, but for the longest times, I was seriously abusing alcohol because of what I went through in those circumstances, and I still see that now. And that took, I don't know, 10 years for me to recover from that and to rebound from that. So, yeah, and I think and we talk about this, and people say, like, how can you, I'm a big person of science. That to me is why I have faith. Christianity is just what I was born into, and I guess that's why I somehow still find some type of solace in it. But people say, like, well, how can you be part of an institution that has done so much harm to the LGBTQ and queer community? And that's a valid argument. I don't know if it's sound, but it's a valid argument. And I say, people have. A lot of institutions in the world have done harm to people. The United States government has done a lot of harm to people. We look at the Constitution and what it said about Black people. And we don't just, yes, we need to challenge that and fight that, obviously. And we need to say, the field of psychiatry, which I work from as a clinical social worker working towards licensure, that's the field of psychiatry has done immense harm to people. And I guess what I say is, what would you like better? Would you like a person who is openly gay, an activist, and working to help some people who might want to still be gay, queer, trans, whatever, and Christian? Or would you like me to have taken the other route, the self-hating gay person who internalizes the homophobia that is imposed upon them by the church and does further harm to the queer community?
Mm-hmm. So, it sounds like religion has done more harm than perhaps good in your experience. That'd be fair to say. But you do still hold on to some faith elements. I did want to ask you, do you currently congregate? Are you part of a church community? What could you tell us, like what denomination?
Yeah, I'm, I guess, mainline Protestant, Presbyterian. We're dying off. We're not, church in the U.S. is, religiosity, church attendance is declining in general. Unfortunately, evangelicals are still going pretty strong. I think they're about 20% of the population, but I'm part of mainline Protestant Presbyterian, a Presbyterian tradition who is radically inclusive to all more marginalized people. And if that wasn't the case, if I didn't have a church like I have, I just wouldn't go. And I think,
are there female priests or pastors allowed?
Both of right now are main pastor, head pastor, he retired. He was actually very pivotal in the Presbyterian PCUSA, that's the church I'm affiliated with, when they were willing to start ordaining gay and trans people. He had a lot of backlash, and he risked a lot for that move, but he recognized back in 2009, 2010 that change was happening, that people didn't care about gay and trans people. Well, there's still a lot of problems with, and my pastor who married my husband and I, she risked her ordination to do a same-sex couple. You know, the Presbytery would have allowed her to continue to be a minister there, but she would have lost her ordination. But thankfully that didn't happen. You know, we have two, am I allowed to say they're badass women who are right now, who are leading my church. And our attendance grows continuously, even over COVID. We have people who come, and honestly, there's a lot of people like myself who maybe were, and I think a lot of people are deconstructing isn't a bad thing. If you're deconstructing your faith, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think if people hear you say you're deconstructing your faith, that means you're leaving religion. I think a lot of people are deconstructing their faith and they just don't realize that. A lot of people come through, like myself in my church, who for some reason walk into a church and something still gives them a feeling of serenity. They still want a feeling of community. They just don't know necessarily what they believe. And that's deconstruction. Like I don't think, and I don't care who hears it, I don't think that Jesus thought he was divine. I don't think he was divine. I think he was trying to challenge the status quo. My favorite book in the Bible is the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark. It's our first gospel that we're aware of, and it's underrated. He doesn't care. He doesn't want people to know. He's just trying to be devoted to a cause. And to me, as a social worker who's underworked and overpaid, I identify with that. I'll go down for a cause. I put my livelihood on the line many times. I pick my battles, obviously, but you know what? If it meant being there for my community and making change, I would put my career on the line, like Jesus put his life on the line.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. What would you say are some of those aspects of Christianity or religion altogether that you do stand against?
That's a good question.
Find trouble with?
That's a good question. I think writing this book, this manuscript that I'm adapting into a podcast was fundamentalism, fundamentalist evangelicals in particular, just being there. I find not just the homophobia and transphobia, but the misogyny that you see there, the double standards. And I think also things, the blatant denial or contradiction, but things they say like, oh, well, we're not part of, we don't influence the law, but then they'll stand up during sermons, which I've watched, and say, dear God, thank you for appointing Justice Amy Cohen to the bench. I'm like, what do you mean? Yeah. This is totally church state violation. And I think this is where it doesn't have anything to do with the Bible, really. And that's what I wanted to do when I had this opportunity with this, because I was on sabbatical from my job, and I had the opportunity to really sit down and read the Bible. And I read the clobber verses. There's no way you can sit there and read the Bible in 2 years. It's just not possible. Unless you understand Greek, Hebrew thoroughly, you really can't say you've read all of the translations, etc. But it doesn't have anything to do really with homosexuality. If you read the Bible, it's so ambiguous at best. The only thing you could get, I think, is Leviticus 18 and 20. Those verses, the best you can get. And even with the Pauline corpus within the book of Romans and 1 Corinthians, the best you can get is a prohibition on penetrative anal sex. That's the best you could get. Does that mean oral, anal, kink, BDSM are okay? So it doesn't have anything to do with being gay, homosexuality, trans, whatnot. It's about this male patriarchy. And anything that deviates from that is a problem. So, and in particular, and this is where I think the particular why gay people, trans people too, they're so misunderstood and they don't stand a chance. I don't, if you want to ask me that question later, but what I saw was the most devastating thing I saw in my infiltrating the fundamentalist evangelical church community was the purity culture, this prohibition on sex, and it reminds me a lot of the military. When we looked at the sex assault in the military, the training, the response was like, don't entice men. What did you do? This was what happened in the military with the overwhelming accounts of sex assault in the military was to the victims who were predominantly women, but there were even men who were victims, was what did you do to entice this person? And that's the same standard in purity culture. It's men are weak, and if you're a woman and you have sex, you lord them. And then on top of that, it's this, I've literally sat there and listened in sermons where they say your job is to give it to your man. And if you're not going to get it, give it to him. He's going to go get it from somewhere else. That's toxic. That's toxic. So that's one of my biggest problems. Besides the homophobia and the transphobia, just that double standards on women, I think, was one of my biggest problems.
Yeah. And also things like gender inequality as well. I think it goes back to what you were saying about the whole patriarchal attitude about it. And I think another aspect of that would be more of like the procreation aspect, more like.
Oh, for God's sake, don't even get me started. Well, I mean, the Jews, and we can't even call them Jews, we could have called them Israelites probably at the time that the Bible was forming, were a bunch of nomadic goat herders who life expectancy was a third of what it is today. You had 17, 18, 19 kids, and you were lucky if three or four of them survived past infancy. So yes, at that time, sex without procreation was important because you didn't procreate, then you couldn't pass down your genes. We don't have that problem right now. We're actually at the complete opposite end of the spectrum right now. And the whole not part of the natural order just makes me want to seriously bang my head off my keyboard. It is natural. Homosexuality is natural. We don't understand all components of it, just like we don't understand all components of heterosexuality. But what we do know about homosexuality is it's not chosen or acquired. It's a normal variant on human sexuality. It's not indicative of psychopathology in any way. Once upon a time it was in the field of psychiatry. That's why between 1952 and 1973 it was listed in the DSM as mental illness. But the DSM, the field of psychiatry, also said that Black people were naturally less intelligent. The DSM also said that if you were a woman and you aspired to anything but marriage, you had what we would call bipolar disorder. So we have to rely on science, and we have to say there can be a place for religion in life, but we have to keep it in checks and balances. Whether you believe in another plane of existence or not.
Okay, so thanks, Jason, for sharing. And I do want to ask you, what aspect of the Bible do you then still find that's relevant to your life? And kind of give me some of the reasons. I'd like to know, like, your reasons for still having faith in God and what that looks like.
So one of the things I wrote about in the manuscript was the one question, like, what did Jesus say about homosexuality? And people always say nothing. Okay, that's fine. So you find what does both sides of the debate say? You have the apologists who say, well, it was so abhorrent, at the time, he wouldn't have had to say anything. And then you'll find some who quote Mark and Matthew. I forget the verse off the top of my head. He's talking about, like, a man will leave his home and marry his wife, quoting from Genesis. That's another example of context when you have to look back. He's talking about divorce in marriage. He's not talking about celibacy. He's not talking about gay marriage, which wasn't even on the radar at the time. But if we're going to play these games of what ifs, what if he was gay and challenging the status quo? That's what I say. And again, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the Hebrew Bible, although it's part of the canon. Again, my favorite book of the Bible is the Gospel of Mark. And I think it's funny that we paid most attention to Matthew because it's the first gospel in the New Testament, first book in the New Testament, I'm sorry. But Mark, again, is just an underrated, self-sacrificing person challenging the status quo. And that's what I identify with it. Now, again, what I say is that I was raised Christian. If I was raised Jewish, if I was raised Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, maybe I would cling to those faith traditions. It just so happens that I was raised Christian. That's just my worldview per se, but my faith in God, if you want to call it God, you could call it the cosmos, etc. Like my faith in a higher plane comes off of personal experiences that are unique to me. And I can't put those on to other people. If you'd like to know those experiences, I can tell you them, and they are actually pretty compelling. They could just be coincidence as well, but those are experiences to me that have happened frequently that lead me to believe that I'm part of a larger system that is not just living and dying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. Could you maybe share what perhaps were some maybe experiences or things that you considered that perhaps led you to question not faith altogether, but sounds like a fundamentalist Christianity? What would you say?
So I think there's a saying, and I've heard it a few times, that God protects the vulnerable and idiots or the helpless. And I think I've fallen into both those camps throughout my life. I'm a very lucky person. It could just be that I have stamina and endurance, but a lot of things that I've done in my life, I've put myself into very stupid situations. And I've just so been fortunate to have overcome the adverse outcomes that a lot of other people have experienced, especially gay men of my generation. So there's that. I also had a partner when I first came into my early adulthood in the gay community who had gone through a lot of the things I went through, if not worse. Came from probably the most fundamentalist Christian family I've ever known. We were together for 11 years. I never met his family, nor did I. Well, he told me you will never meet my family. The only time I met them was at his funeral. He was 11 years older than me. We were together 11 years. I was the same age he was when he met me. And it was this weird confluence of events that showed me that we're kind of all connected. Again, I was 22. He was 33 when I met him. I was 33 when he died, 11 years together. That number 11 seems to pop up everywhere and has so much significance for me. Again, that could all just be coincidence. But to me, and just the way I wasn't seeking those signs, I wasn't seeking those patterns of connection. So, and I think I definitely maybe have a worldview of kind of like a Christian Buddhist type thing per se, but Christianity is just the dominant religion in America. If I could go out and find a Buddhist temple or Buddhist community, yeah, there's yoga communities, but one that really practiced the Buddhist noble truths, for the path, maybe I would go there, but Christianity is just the dominant faith. If I want to find, and I'm lucky I'm at least not where you are. I think it's probably harder to find an LGBTQ affirming church in Texas than it is where I am. There's quite a few. We have a network of particularly Presbyterian traditions where I am I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There's at least about 30, 40 of them, where if anyone wants to go, they do not have to worry about their sexuality if they're not straight, or their gender identity if they're trans. They are welcome there.
That's good. I'm glad that you were able to find a community that's accepting and then you feel welcoming there. 'Cause certainly, yeah, there's a lot of fundamentalist denominations out there that they might not advertise, they might not say anything, but there's always a little something.
And I've
And
had
it's usually
problems. I've had, there's been problems with my church. I've had problems with my church too for people they've collaborated with. I'm I'm an activist, I'm a social worker. And I was lucky to be able to voice those concerns to my church, and they listened to them and heard them. So it's not like you're always going to have that. There's not going to be, even within my church, there are people who don't like the fact that we're radically inclusive, but my pastors will say, and there's a church right down the street.
I want to step into a little bit of theology, perhaps. Could you define what God is for you?
Christian, I would say I'm a postmodern Christian. You know, a postmodern in the sense that I recognize that the Christianity has had an impact on my worldview, in many other people's worldviews, regardless if they identify as Christian. Theology is, and that's the part about theology. Theology derived from that Greek word theos and logia, meaning that you're in discourse. What is your account of the divine? What are you in dialogue with the divine about?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of people have that, especially in fundamentalist Orthodox traditions. That's proscribed to them. They don't have the ability, at least publicly, to be. So to me, theology is like when you sit down, like, how does the Bible speak to you, and how do you make sense of it? And then the question is can you have that dialogue with people within the church? I have even people within my family who say, like, I don't have a problem with you, but if I say anything, I'll be shunned. So that's what I mean. That theology, if you want to even call it that proscribed way of thinking is imposed on them by, pastoral staff or PhD academic theologians, which I have a lot of problems with. I really have a lot of problems with, and I think it's dying. I don't think you're even going to see it. It's sad. I have 2 Catholic universities in my major city, and they don't even have theology programs. But that doesn't mean that they still don't wield a lot of influence, those theologians. And, I'm not the only one saying this, and this is a fact that most people have. Again, it's just like in church, in academia, you have to believe a certain way half the time. There's not a lot of people who can have a postmodern interpretation of the Bible publicly.
Yeah, I went to a very fundamentalist seminary, and I remember, like, one of the things that you would get at the beginning of your freshman year or whatever, you get a what we believe, which is the DTS doctrinal statement, and then the custom is to keep it in the Bible. You keep that inside the Bible at all times, because you always want to make sure that whatever you're interpreting, you're within those lines.
And that, yeah, and I mean, like, and that's my thing. Like, that's part of the manuscript in the podcast, is I want to teach people that you can really wobble these people quick. And I think it's really, and I think it's sad that you don't have any credibility unless you have a PhD next to your name, I think. But like I said, as a social worker, I work at the micro level, and I encounter people, and they're always kind of like caught off guard. I think you listen to me when you talk to me. I have a level of credibility, and I think they're cut off guard about that, and they want to like go head to head with me, and they're like, and I say, like, well, then if the Bible is inherently the word of God, where does it say that? And they'll say, well, 2 Timothy, and I'll be like, we don't even know who wrote that. They're like, right. Or then they'll say, like, everything in the Bible is true. And I'm like, then why the different birth accounts, narratives in the Gospels of Jesus in Matthew and Luke? Paul never met Jesus. Like, why do you take so much of his word in Romans and Corinthians and 1 Corinthians as like condemning homosexuality? Well, he never met Jesus and never claimed to met Jesus. And they're like, oh my God, that's not true. I'm like, yes, it is. Like Galatians. So, I think it's, for me, I know that we're deviating from, like, when you're asking me about theology, that's what my theology is. My theology is about, like, having that debate and having that dialogue. And if you can still get to a place where something appeals to you, so be it. And you know what I say to a lot of people? I don't care what you believe. I really don't. If you just believe it within your church. But the problem is you don't. You do things like you ask that politicians take away civil rights for marriage and hate crime or civil rights protection. Family members of mine, like who protested my wedding. Like, if you don't want to if you don't like gay marriage, then don't marry someone of the same gender. But like, if you kept your church in your church, we wouldn't have this problem.
Yeah, and it's like there's, like with anything, there's a spectrum. And so you've got those that are going to adhere to a very fundamentalist reading of everything. And inevitably, you'll run into passages from like the law of Moses and prohibitions and stoning. I mean, like, how do you feel about passages like that, where it really does seem like the death penalty is prescribed for homosexuals? That's part of God's law.
It's prescribed for Joel Baden, I think, is the biggest, if he has the best work on this that I've seen. And I've read a couple of his books. It's prescribing death for penetrative anal sex.
Okay.
I mean, that's the best you can get, if you even believe that. If you even believe that. So to me, and all I say is, and I don't tell people, but like, and I just say, like, what if I don't have anal sex? Am I good? And personally, I don't read. If I had to take any of the books of the Bible out, it would probably be Paul, anything by Paul, because he's could not have enough time on his calendar to write everything that he wrote and still not make any sense. So I would get rid of anything by Paul, and I probably would get rid of the Pentateuch. I think the other books are actually much more interesting in the Hebrew Bible, if I may. Psalms in particular, in Davidian literature. I think those are much more interesting. The Pentateuch, again, is about a bunch of displaced nobodies in the pre 600 BCE who almost went extinct and wanted to have an account for their reason for believing. Those 5 books really do nothing for me. We don't know, especially Leviticus and Deuteronomy. We don't know who those books were written for, who they applied to, how enforceable they were. And again, if you really are, especially if you're someone who's of the fundamentalist tradition, you shouldn't care about the law. You're free of it, according to Paul. So again, if you really want to look at that and you're going to say it's prescribing, then you also have to say, well, then, okay, then I think the reason why they say the law doesn't apply anymore is because of the more heinous things, and actually as heinous as killing gay people is other things like stoning your wife if her vagina doesn't bleed, hymen doesn't bleed on her wedding night. If stoning a disobedient child, there's really no way to rationalize those things, but to just say, okay, that doesn't apply to us anymore. Yeah, then you can't use Leviticus. But again, if you're going to just focus on Leviticus, and it is the quote that you see at every time I'm at Pride and I see those posters protesting, it's always Leviticus. But again, my thing is okay. So if you look at the scholarship says, based down to the Hebrew words used is that it's talking about penetrative male intercourse. So again, as long as I don't have anal sex, I'm good, right? And that, they don't know what to do with that. Then it's your personal opinion. Okay, then I say that's what you feel. Well, no, God would say, okay, then if you're going to go that route, you're going to just say that's what you feel. And where's the cutoff?
What would you say to perhaps a common fundamentalist criticism that perhaps what you're promoting is kind of a cherry picking type of Christianity, where you're just selecting what you like or what chimes with you, but then the other stuff, it's just irrelevant?
I mean, I wouldn't expect that. I think I more or less expect that from the atheist community and from LGBTQ people who criticize me for identifying as Christian. I don't get that. I don't get that from fundamentalist Christians. They just tell me you're wrong, and then they just find some common apologetic response to me, or just walk away. I usually get that from atheists that I'm cherry picking and disregarding it. And I get it. I get it. I'm not, again, I recognize that Christianity has done a lot of harm to my community. I totally understand that. Like I said, a lot of institutions have done a lot of harm to communities. And I don't minimize that whatsoever. But again, my question is that like, can't you at least give me a little bit of credit? And man, I walked onto a few shows like this. One, I didn't realize what I was getting on, and they slammed me. They told me I was no better than Mormons who tell gay kids to kill themselves. It completely just annihilated me. And I even said, like, I got to get off here right now. But my question is like, Matt Dillahunty, by the way, and I have the clip of it. I didn't realize, I thought he was going to ask me questions like this, but he brought me on to say, like, you piece of like, he just completely annihilated me. And I was like, all right. But my thing is that I think on top of that am I at least better than these self-hating gay people who go on and say, and look at them on TikTok right now. I watch the videos all the time, the hashtag #xgay. They have this video montage they do where they all say, the enemy thought he had me, but Jesus said, you are mine. And they show their baptism experience and everything, and how they were at like gay bars and now they're in church. I think those people are doing a lot more harm to LGBTQ people, especially our youth. And I think our gay, trans, bi, queer youth. I know that I at least try to help those people. And there are a lot of gay people, trans, queer people and a lot of other people who are harmed, a lot of not just gay, trans, queer people, a lot of people who have had serious religious trauma who still wish to go to Christian communities. Even the ones that did them harm, they still wish to be there. So as a social worker, activist, and striving expert on religious trauma, those are the people I want to help. But I can take this, and again, I totally get why some people may look at me as an idiot or a hypocrite or a sellout. But I want to have that dialogue. Don't bring me on a show like Matt Dillahunty did and completely just ridicule me.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry that happened.
It is what it is. I mean, they need that. On top of like fundamentalist Christians, I don't agree with these shows that now, if you're dumb enough, I don't want to say dumb enough because I don't think people are faith are stupid, obviously. But if you go on there trying to challenge them, yeah, you got it coming. I wasn't going on there to challenge them. I was just going on to talk about my experience here. But I realize they need that. They need to have their mic drop moments. They need to have the people that they humiliate. It's what gives them, sure, I get it. But a lot of those people need ridiculed. A lot of those fundamentalist apologists need ridiculed because they make themselves look dumb, and I hate to use that word, and they do a lot of harm to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, like for me, like my angle is more of like a critical, amateur scholarly approach to the scripture, usually speaking against fundamentalism, kind of fleshing out some of the misinterpretations in areas where I see that some traditions get it wrong. And I like to kind of dig deep into like origins of things, like where some of the ancient stories came from and all that stuff, where I personally no longer see even Judaism as something that it's truly revealing of some divine God, but perhaps sort of the continuation of several 1,000-year-old tradition of believing in deities and
I think maybe that's why I always come back. And so I guess that begs the question: are you talking about pre-exilic Judaism? Are you talking about post-temple Judaism? I think I probably fall into that, right? If I had to say like Christianity, and that's why, again, the Gospel of Mark, I guess, was, and why I have such affinity for it is because of the suffering that people were going through at that time, how they died such horrible deaths, and they needed something. And I don't think the gospel, and I say the gospel because I say the Gospel of Mark is my guiding thing. I don't think it was meant to be it wasn't meant to be literal. It was meant to be a commentary on the Jewish war, and that particularly why I am completely fine with the short ending of the Gospel of Mark, where the woman flee the tomb and just run and never go back. And it would be horrible news if this was really the end, but it's not the end. That there's a deeper truth that will be revealed if you have faith. That is just my take on it. But even scribes didn't like that ending because it's not a very satisfying ending. It's a very, as John, forget the scholar, it's a very unromantic Jesus. Power of the Parables. What's his name? Wrote the book, The Power of Parables. I forget his name, but he says the Gospels are all one big parable, and they weren't meant to be taken literally. Mark 4, he says, to those outside, these are parables, but to you, these are the mysteries of the kingdom of God. So that's
yeah, you're onto something. I think it's like that. You've heard of the secret Gospel of Mark, and that could have been
the Messianic secret. He didn't want it to be out, because again, this was supposed to be metaphor. It wasn't meant to be truth. Oh, what is his name? I gotta get it. I think he said something along the lines of, they either meant it to be symbolically, and we're so dumb that we take it literally. But yeah. I mean, it will be a matter of time. I mean, I think that, especially if I think most of the research shows that I don't think anyone's doubting the fact that Islam will supersede Christianity globally. Christianity will always have a footprint in the United States, but it will become less and less significant, even in my lifetime. I don't know about you, but I have every church I have, like especially Catholic church, are now breweries.
They have what was the last thing? They're
breweries. They're Catholic churches now. They're converting them into beer breweries.
Oh.
Like they're all like, they're not even all, there's churches are shutting down left and right here where I live.
Well, that's kind of ironic because for centuries on, the church monopolized the industry of beer. That's what they specialized on, was making beer.
Yeah, but again, I think in all seriousness, I think that you're going to see churches just become less and less relevant, and I hope. What will it be replaced with? Is my question. Will it be? Does it necessarily? I think that hopefully between both of them, I think it's both science and philosophy. I agree with Richard Carrier there. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think that I should replace it with science and philosophy.
Do you think it's possible that a resurrection took place?
No. How do you define resurrection?
Well, like Jesus, like how it says on Matthew and Luke and so forth.
Well, so I think it's funny, and I always say I had, and this is the basis of evangelicalism, is the evangelized based off the Great Commission. So if you're basing it off that verse, shouldn't you be promoting Judaism? Because the gospel, Jesus of Matthew was a proud, passionate Jew, so Jewish he could spit. So like he wasn't starting a new religion, so shouldn't you be evangelizing Judaism? There's that part. And like, where did he go? Like, I mean, like, no, I don't believe in a bodily resurrection. I think that's just a motif on common areas. Now, I do believe that they had some experience to believe that he went on, his disciples and those who followed him. So, and I think that that they truly believed he went on to another plane of existence. So, if you want to call that resurrection, sure. But do I believe he ascended into the sky as in the Gospel of Luke? Like, where did he go? Like, I mean,
yeah, it really does seem like the Bible, including the New Testament, presupposes kind of a different cosmology.
It's promoting a cosmology of the time. They believe there were levels of heaven, and he was enthroned in the firmament. we just don't believe that anymore. So, but again, I don't think the Gospels were written to be meant to be taken literally. Mm-hmm. So, and for those that are brave enough to acknowledge that, you can find some truth for you, some creative interpretation for you. But and how can you impose that on other people? You can't. You have to believe a proscribed belief system to you if you're going to try to convert other people to it. I don't have enough time to convert other people. Too busy as protecting LGBTQ children from religious bigotry. I don't have any time to convert people.
So let's bring it back to LGBTQ plus. What challenges have you faced with like integrating your position, your nature, your identity with regards to that, and then like spiritual beliefs, the church, etc.?
If I didn't go to my church, or at least have an affirming church, I would be told, it's okay that you're gay, you just can't act on it. And that's very unhealthy. And I don't know how to look at people. I tell people when they say that to me, and they tell that to me about kids, I'm like, do you understand how harmful that is? Like, sex is an innate expression of our core existence. So to deprive someone of sex. Now, there are people out there who just don't have sex. They don't have sex, and they're fine with that. There's plenty of priests out there who were fine with celibacy. A lot of them who weren't, and it made them do horrible things. Now, we don't know whether the mandatory celibacy caused people to created pedophilia. We don't have enough evidence to say that, but what we do see, and I think a good scholar on this topic is Dr. Mary Frawley-O'Dea. She was featured in the book, in the documentary Deliver Us from Evil, but she showed overwhelmingly a lot of those men who were named as offenders went into seminaries at very minor ages 14, 15, 16. They were thinking of vocations from a very early age. So they literally got arrested in their psychosexual development. And when they could no longer remain celibate, or their sexual urges became too much, they sought out victims that they identified on some level of sexual pierce. So that, and it just makes people do crazy stuff. I tell you, I have seen, mandatory celibacy do some serious damage to people in terms of, risky sexual behavior, substance abuse, suppressing their sexuality to such an extent that they don't even realize when they're acting on it, i.e. in back alleys, hooking up with 4, 5, and 6 new partners a week, not getting tested out of fear of being exposed. It really does a lot. So there's that element of it. So, religion, faith, Christianity in particular, that aspect of it has been, again, so I'm lucky that I could go to a church and be completely open in who I am. Again, I've also seen some churches that claim to be LGBTQ affirming and do things like not recognize, like my church did, collaborate with people who were really hostile towards us. One of them had affiliations with Dr. Gowan. He was a professor. I have to get his name. I can't not get this one. I couldn't forget the other one, but he was probably one of the most outspoken opponents of the LGBTQ community ever. What is his name? I'll Google his name and give it to you. He wrote a book like this thick. He's still pretty prominent. You can find him on. Let me see if I can Google him right now. Gowan is his name, Dr. Gowan. Collaborated with churches that had connections to him, and that nearly had me lose my faith. I literally I did walk away from my church for about 6 months, and I demanded an apology for their lack of being able to understand how much harm you do when you affiliate with people who've done harm to us. So, I mean, those are the only 2 things I could say per se, but that first is the reality that many, particularly gay men, have to live with, is that whole, not a sin to be gay, just a sin to act on it. And you don't understand how devastating that can be to people. And it has consequences even outside of gay men. Now,
Yeah,
trans
it's such a double standard too, because it's not like people are being told not to masturbate. I mean, like,
oh no,
uh,
they say
right?
you can masturbate, just don't think of gay men when you're doing it. And that's the whole part of purity culture. They say you can masturbate, just don't think about sex. And do you understand what the harm that does to people in terms of like teaching you? And this is the other thing we don't talk a lot about as well. And I've seen this a lot with trans people, transgender, non-binary people, is this idea of, especially youth who are brought up in that culture, is this idea in purity culture of fearing your body, fearing the flesh. This can have particular ramifications for trans and non-binary people because they have this dysphoria they haven't figured out yet, and they don't have language for it. So this idea of fearing your body and fearing who you are does immense trauma to them, even long after they leave religious communities. So that's purity culture has reaching consequences.
Yeah, and it gets worse the more fundamentalist you go. I mean, we were not recommended like masturbating. That's taboo.
I know. Well, again, can you say that you didn't? If you thought about sex when you did it, that's don't even then they quote Matthew too. Don't even if you think about a woman who committed adultery.
Yeah.
So, but the whole and the trans thing, trans non-binary thing, it's off the table with fundamentalist Christians. I can work sometimes with sexual minority families with a lesbian, gay, bisexual kid, but if there's a trans and non-binary kid, it's off the table. They go back to like the whole Genesis narrative, and what they mean is that not identifying with the biology you're assigned, and a lot of them don't. A lot of people in general don't understand biology from gender, but not identifying as the biology you were assigned and messing with that is playing the hands of God. And I'm just like, there's a lot of things we do that play the hands of God in our modern world. Like, isn't me wearing glasses playing the hands of God? Isn't modern medicine playing hands of God? Isn't plastic surgery that a lot of fundamentalist women get to be enticing to their husbands, isn't that playing the hand of God? But it's a hands-off thing. I feel bad for trans people in particular. I feel bad for trans people in general, how bad it is for them and how horribly they're mistreated within society at large. But within religious settings, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, interesting. So, like, tell me about like what are perhaps some things that keep you from rejecting theism altogether?
That for me, that's just for me. So for me, that I can walk into my church on a Sunday and have a woman pastor, that I was able to walk in and have a beautiful marriage that was recognized by the government and that my pastor signed off on, that I can go to youth programming at my church, and when they go around and introduce themselves, they say my name and my pronouns. To me, that is, and again, I've had my own personal experiences. I've had parts when I do it, and you could call me self-deluded, self-deceived. I've had parts where I read the Bible and something speaks to me. But that's just me. Now, again, if I got to the point where my church were to close and there weren't these affirming institutions, maybe I'm not really a theist. Maybe I'm a deist. Maybe I'm agnostic on the higher spectrum. But again, I just have had my own personal experiences that have led me to believe that, again, I'm part of a system that transcends this plane that we know as Earth. And you know what? I mean, this is for us. These are conversations that are good for, like you said, examining the Bible. And I talk about this in my manuscript. I look at like a historical, critical approach to the Bible. That to me is much more interesting than theology. But I also talk about, you ain't getting very far with the fundamentalist. They got a lot more to lose than you do. And I don't want to be honest with you. I just would like you to see where some of the belief systems you have are really problematic, particularly that you're rejecting your kid because they're gay or trans, or you're saying things like, And now it's not just, here's the other thing, it's not just the LGBTQ community, it's the Black community is at risk now because of this trying to prevent the fact that the United States historically is racist and done horrible things to the Black community. You're seeing legislation preventing the history of racism not being taught in schools. So it's not, Christian nationalism knows no boundaries, or white Christian nationalism knows no boundaries. It will do
Talking about like critical race theory.
Yes. Well, I mean, not critical race theory, because
that's part of it.
Well, critical race theory is a complex legal school of that I took a class in graduate school on, and I had a hard time digesting. It's a very complex legal school, and it has several principles that have to be incorporated into it in order to say that the application of critical race theory is being used. It's just history they don't want taught in schools. They don't want history taught in school. So when people say no critical race theory in my kid's school, I'm like, who's teaching critical race theory? No one's teaching.
No one.
Yeah, they just don't want history to be taught about the history of.
I taught fifth grade social studies.
Yeah.
And we were asked, or we were forbidden from teaching about Thomas Jefferson. We could not say anything about him. I think we talked about Jefferson Davis, the person that gets brought in when you talk about like the forefathers and all that stuff. But it's so weird. I did not agree with doing that.
But the thing is, and this is where I come in. This is where I say, like, I am as a social worker, I work at the micro and the meso level. But the vast majority of our legislators are fundamentalist, evangelical, Catholic, and make our laws. So, and when I say to people who complain, who don't want this stuff happening, I say, pull up your voting record. You go online and you can see it. Let me see your voting record. If I see your voting record and you're not voting, don't talk to me. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. If the majority, if you look at how much of an impact your vote could have had to have kept a Republican or anyone within the white Christian nationalist movement, I don't know what to say to you. So that's where and as a government employee, I can't endorse specific candidates, but I can just, again, emphasize the power of voting.
So with all this, what message would you like to convey to viewers that perhaps are still struggling with accepting LGBTQ plus individuals in their faith communities?
I say to you, is that really what you believe in your heart of hearts? Are you one of those people that say, because there's three types I encounter, and I talk about this in the manuscript and on my podcast. There's the ones who legit believe it. Those are the ones who say, like, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. It's in the Bible a few times. Couldn't tell you where it is, but it's there. Then you have the ones who they know there's more, that there's ways to shut down their arguments, but they employ those apologetic responses. Those are the ones that make the hair stand on my neck when I talk to them. They seriously freak me out. And they're smart people half the time. They're doctors. They're smart people. And then there's those ones again who know in their heart that it's not wrong. They just can't speak it. They can't go on the record about it. And I ask people, where do you fall on that camp? Only you can answer that question. Then I say things like, and again, you got to see some of the stuff. It really is still rooted in the fact of, like, your mother was too overbearing. You didn't have a close enough father. You had too many friends of the opposite gender. You were sexually abused. These are outdated mentalities. At the end of the day, we don't know what makes someone gay, lesbian, or bi. But what we do know is that it's not chosen and it can't be changed. And we definitely don't know what makes people trans. So that's the best I can do. And you know what? There's really not much I can do if you're of those traditions, of those communities who say, and you just simply go on their websites and you can say, you see their belief systems. And they say something like anything but biblical marriage is sin. I'm like, oh, if you only knew what biblical marriage actually meant. But you're going off the notion of dominant husband, submissive wife, is what you think biblical marriage is. If you're part of that tradition, there's not much hope I can do to you. One day you'll get out, hopefully. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Lastly,
Mhm.
can you share any advice or words of encouragement for other LGBTQ plus members, individuals who may be facing similar struggles in reconciling their sexuality with their religious or spiritual beliefs?
I'll quote my one close friend. They just graduated seminary, trans person. And they said, a non-binary person said, if you're away from a religion and happy, stay away. God would not want you to be unhappy. And if you are someone who still wants to be part of a faith tradition, we live in a very digital world. There's supports out there. The worst thing you can do is isolate, because especially when you're a child or a young adult, when you isolate, you do really sad things, terrible things. So find a community, especially in colleges. There's a lot more opportunities for queer LGBTQ people to find a faith tradition that's permanent there. Sometimes you're not able to get it immediately where you are, but I hate to be cliche, but it gets better.
Wow, thank you. Well, Jason, this has been a wonderful and insightful conversation. I'm so glad that you agreed to come in my channel and share your experiences and your thoughts. Any last words, any last things that you would like to share with us? I would also be interested in learning where others can hear about the material that you're putting out there. And I do know that you're an up and coming YouTuber, and you've got a channel, you've got a TikTok account. Tell us, feel free to share.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok as Jesus Over the Rainbow, and that's the name of the podcast. I'm getting some flack for saying Jesus Over the Rainbow. Why some Christians hate LGBTQ people, but at the end of the day, it's hate. You can call it bigotry, you can call it it's hate. So I'm not going to change that name. So, and I would like to be in this dialogue. So if you can tell people who are willing to have me come on their channels like you did and not humiliate me for being a Christian, identifying as a Christian. I think I could bring a lot to the table, but again, people see that in my bio and they immediately shut me down. So hopefully this interview can be testimony that I actually can bring a lot to the table if you just give me a chance.
For sure. Well, I do want to encourage you to keep it up, and thank you for the service that you do provide for our communities out there that are in great need, such as the LGBTQ plus, which I fully support. And so, thank you for being on the show.
Of course.
Thank you, folks, for watching. And this has been Apostate of Mind.
Godspeed.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
They call me a